Margaret had always been the kind of person who noticed things others didn't. At 42, she was an experienced nurse at Hillside Retirement Home, a quiet facility nestled in a small town surrounded by rolling hills and whispering trees. She loved her job because it allowed her to make a difference in people's lives, especially those who needed care the most. But lately, something about one of her favorite residents, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, had started gnawing at her peace of mind. Eleanor was an elegant woman in her mid-80s, with silver hair always neatly combed and eyes that still sparkled despite her age. Despite her frailty, she carried herself with grace and wit, often sharing stories of her youth or cracking jokes during meals. Margaret admired Eleanor's spirit, but over the past few weeks, she'd begun noticing subtle changes in her demeanor. The lively spark in Eleanor's eyes seemed dimmer, and her once strong voice now wavered when she spoke. What worried Margaret even more were the bruises, small at first, then larger and darker, that began appearing on Eleanor's arms and legs. At first, Margaret thought these injuries might be accidental. Elderly residents sometimes stumbled or bumped into furniture, and Eleanor did have trouble walking without assistance. But as the bruises multiplied, Margaret couldn't ignore the fact that they didn't look like typical accident marks. Some were circular, as though someone had gripped her too tightly. Others were linear, almost like finger imprints. When Margaret gently asked Eleanor where the bruises came from, the elderly woman would glance away and mumble vague answers like, "Oh, I must have hit something," or, "It's nothing, dear." Something wasn't adding up. Margaret trusted most of the staff at Hillside. They were good people who genuinely cared for their residents. But there was one caregiver whose behavior raised red flags. Carla, a young woman in her late 20s, worked the night shift and often handled Eleanor's care during those hours. Margaret had never liked Carla much. She always seemed impatient, snapping at residents or muttering under her breath when they needed extra help. And whenever Margaret brought up Eleanor's condition, Carla dismissed it with a shrug, saying things like, "She's old. These things happen." One evening after finishing her rounds, Margaret lingered near Eleanor's room, pretending to organize supplies while keeping an eye on Carla. Through the slightly open door, she watched as Carla adjusted Eleanor's blankets with sharp, jerky movements. Eleanor winced but said nothing. Margaret felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was Carla just clumsy, or was there something more sinister going on? That night, Margaret lay awake in bed, replaying the scene in her mind. She knew she couldn't let this go. If Eleanor was being mistreated, it was her duty to find out and stop it. But how could she prove what was happening behind closed doors? Daytime shifts were busy, with multiple caregivers coming and going, making it hard to pinpoint who might be responsible. The real issue likely happened during the quieter, less supervised nighttime hours when Carla was alone with the residents. Idea began forming in Margaret's mind, an idea that made her uneasy but also determined. She remembered hearing about hidden cameras disguised as ordinary objects like clocks or smoke detectors. Could she install one in Eleanor's room without anyone knowing? It felt risky, maybe even wrong. But Margaret couldn't think of another way to get answers. She reasoned that if she uncovered proof of abuse, it would justify breaking the rules. After all, protecting Eleanor was worth any risk. The next day, Margaret visited an electronics store during her lunch break. She bought a small camera designed to blend seamlessly into any environment. Back at Hillside, she waited until the hallways were empty before slipping into Eleanor's room. Her hands trembled as she mounted the device high on the wall, positioning it to capture the entire space without drawing attention. Once it was secure, she took a deep breath, hoping she hadn't made a mistake. For the rest of the day, Margaret tried to act normal, chatting with coworkers and tending to her duties, as usual. But inside, she was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, guilt, and determination swirling together. She told herself she was doing the right thing, but the weight of secrecy pressed heavily on her shoulders. That evening, as she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about what the camera might reveal. Would it show nothing, leaving her feeling foolish for doubting Carla? Or would it confirm her worst fears, forcing her to confront a painful truth? When Margaret finally sat down at her kitchen table to review the footage, her heart raced. She clicked play, watching as the video captured Eleanor settling into bed, flipping through a magazine, and eventually turning off the light. For a while, everything seemed calm and uneventful. Then around midnight, the door creaked open. Margaret leaned closer to the screen as Carla stepped into the frame. What happened next left Margaret speechless. Margaret sat frozen in her chair, her eyes glued to the screen as the video continued playing. The footage showed Carla entering Eleanor's room with a clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable in the dim light. At first, everything seemed routine. Carla moved toward Eleanor's bed, adjusting the blankets and checking the IV line attached to her arm. But then, something shifted. Eleanor stirred slightly, mumbling something in her sleep. Carla paused, looking down at her with an impatient scowl. "Mrs. Grayson," Carla whispered sharply, shaking Eleanor's shoulder harder than necessary. "Wake up. I need you to sit up for a minute." Eleanor blinked awake, confusion clouding her face. What is it?" she asked groggily, trying to push herself upright. Margaret watched as Eleanor struggled, her frail arms trembling under the effort. Instead of helping her gently, Carla grabbed her by the shoulders and yanked her into a sitting position. Eleanor gasped in pain, wincing as Carla's grip tightened. "This shouldn't be so hard," Carla muttered, her tone dripping with irritation. "You're not even that heavy. Stop being difficult." Margaret's stomach churned as she saw Eleanor shrink back, fear flickering in her tired eyes. She tried to protest weakly, saying, "Please don't. It hurts." But Carla didn't seem to care. With a rough shove, she pushed Eleanor back against the pillows, causing her head to snap backward. The camera caught every detail: the way Eleanor flinched, the grimace of discomfort crossing her face, and the dismissive glare Carla gave before turning away. But it didn't end there. As the video rolled on, Margaret witnessed more unsettling behavior. Carla began rearranging items on the bedside table, slamming them down with unnecessary force. When a glass of water tipped over, spilling onto the floor, Carla let out an exasperated sigh and muttered something under her breath. Margaret couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable: angry, frustrated, and entirely inappropriate for someone caring for an elderly resident. Then came the moment that made Margaret's blood run cold. Eleanor, still visibly shaken, mustered the courage to ask softly, "Why are you so upset with me? Did I do something wrong?" Carla spun around, her face twisted in annoyance. "Wrong? You're always doing something wrong," she snapped, her voice low but venomous. "You never listen, you never cooperate, and no one else here has time to deal with your nonsense. So stop complaining and just do what you're told." Margaret felt a lump rise in her throat as she watched Eleanor recoil, tears welling up in her eyes. For a woman who had once been so full of life and independence, this treatment was unbearable to witness. Eleanor didn't respond, instead, pulling the blanket tighter around herself as if trying to shield her body from further harm. Carla lingered in the room for a few more minutes, muttering complaints about her workload and how people like Eleanor made her job harder. Finally, she left, slamming the door behind her. When the screen went dark again, Margaret sat in stunned silence. Her mind raced with questions and emotions. How could someone entrusted with caring for vulnerable people behave this way? Why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? And most importantly, what should she do now? The weight of the situation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She knew she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. It wasn't just negligence. It was outright cruelty. For hours, Margaret replayed the footage, analyzing every second to ensure she hadn't misinterpreted anything. Each viewing only deepened her resolve. This wasn't just about Eleanor anymore. It was about protecting all the residents who might be suffering silently under Carla's care. Yet despite her determination, doubts crept in. What if no one believed her? Installing the camera without permission was technically against the rules, and revealing its existence could jeopardize her career. Even worse, it might discredit the evidence itself, leaving Eleanor and others at risk. As dawn broke outside her window, Margaret decided to confide in someone she trusted implicitly: Lisa, her closest friend and fellow nurse at Hillside. They had worked together for years, sharing both laughter and tears, and Margaret knew Lisa would understand the gravity of the situation. That morning, as they met in the staff lounge before their shifts began, Margaret hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "Lisa, I need to tell you something. Something big." Lisa raised an eyebrow, setting down her coffee cup. "What's going on? You look like you haven't slept all night." Taking a deep breath, Margaret explained everything: the bruises, her suspicions about Carla, and the hidden camera. She pulled out her phone and played the footage for Lisa, watching as her friend's expression transformed from curiosity to shock to anger. "Oh my goodness," Lisa whispered when the video ended. That's abuse, plain and simple. We can't let this slide, Margaret. You did the right thing by recording this." "I know," Margaret replied, though her voice trembled. "But what if we report it and nothing happens? Or, worse, what if they fire me for installing the camera illegally? I mean, I broke the rules, Lisa. Big time." Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Listen to me. Yes, you bent the rules, but you did it to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. If anyone gives you trouble, I'll back you up. And if we present this evidence carefully, with witnesses and documentation, they'll have no choice but to take it seriously." Her words brought some comfort, but Margaret still felt uneasy. This wasn't just about her job or reputation. It was about doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Over the next hour, the two women devised a plan. Margaret would keep gathering evidence, documenting every instance of mistreatment captured on camera. Meanwhile, Lisa would discreetly observe Carla's interactions with other residents, looking for patterns or additional signs of abuse. Together, they hoped to build a case strong enough to bring Carla's actions to light. By the time Margaret clocked in for her shift, her nerves were frayed, but her resolve was firm. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't turn away now. As she walked down the hallway toward Eleanor's room, she glanced at the tiny camera hidden high on the wall. It was a small device, barely noticeable, yet it held the power to change everything. For Eleanor, for Hillside Retirement Home, and perhaps even for Margaret herself. The next morning, Margaret's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as she prepared for her shift. She had spent the entire night replaying the footage in her head, reliving every harsh word and rough gesture Carla had directed at Eleanor. The anger and guilt churned inside her. Anger toward Carla for her cruelty and guilt for not acting sooner. But now, armed with evidence and Lisa's support, she felt a flicker of hope. Still, confronting Carla directly wasn't something Margaret took lightly. It required precision, timing, and the right words to avoid tipping off the caregiver too soon. Margaret decided to approach Carla casually during their shift overlap that afternoon. She waited until they were alone in the staff break room, where the hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Carla stood by the counter sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to Margaret's presence. Taking a deep breath, Margaret stepped forward, forcing herself to sound calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "Hey, Carla," Margaret began, keeping her tone light but probing. "I wanted to ask you about Mrs. Grayson. She seemed a little off last night. Did everything go okay during your rounds?" Carla glanced up, her expression guarded. For a moment, she didn't respond, as if weighing her words carefully. Then, with a shrug, she replied, "Yeah, I guess so." She was confused again, like usual. You know how it is with her? Always asking questions or resisting help. Margaret studied Carla's face closely, searching for any sign of unease or dishonesty. "Confused? What do you mean?" She pressed gently. "Did she say something specific?" Carla rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by the line of questioning. "Not really. Just the same old stuff. Why are you here? What are you doing? That kind of thing. Honestly, it's exhausting. I don't know why she has to make such a big deal out of everything." Her dismissive tone sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through Margaret, but she forced herself to stay composed. She said, nodding slowly. "Well, maybe we should keep an extra eye on her. She's been bruising a lot lately, and I'm starting to worry it's more than just accidents." Carla stiffened slightly, though she tried to mask it with another shrug. "Bruises happen, Margaret. She's old. Skin gets fragile. Maybe she bumps into things without realizing it." Margaret nodded again, letting the conversation trail off. She didn't want to push too hard and risk alerting Carla that she was onto her, but she couldn't let the matter drop entirely either. As Carla turned back to her phone, Margaret excused herself, stepping out of the break room with her heart pounding. The exchange had confirmed one thing. Carla was hiding something. Whether it was guilt over her actions or fear of being caught, Margaret couldn't tell, but she knew she needed to tread carefully. Later that evening, after her shift ended, Margaret met Lisa in the parking lot. They sat together in Margaret's car, the engine off, as she recounted the conversation with Carla. Lisa listened intently, her brow furrowed in thought. "She's definitely hiding something," Lisa said, when Margaret finished. "You can hear it in the way she deflects. She talks about Eleanor like she's a nuisance instead of a person who needs care. That kind of attitude doesn't come from nowhere." "I know," Margaret agreed, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But what do I do next? If I report this now, they'll ask how I got the footage, and once they find out I installed the camera without permission, they might throw out the evidence or worse, fire me." Lisa leaned back in her seat, tapping her fingers against her knee as she considered the dilemma. "We need more proof," she said finally. "Something undeniable. Something that shows this isn't just a one-time incident but a pattern of abuse." Margaret nodded, though the idea of waiting longer made her stomach twist. Every day that passed meant another night. Eleanor could be mistreated, but Lisa was right. They needed to build a solid case before taking action. Together, they devised a plan to gather additional evidence discreetly. Over the next few days, Margaret continued reviewing the nightly footage, documenting every instance of Carla's abusive behavior. Each new discovery weighed heavily on her conscience. One clip showed Carla mocking Eleanor's confusion, rolling her eyes and muttering sarcastic comments under her breath. Another revealed Carla forcefully adjusting Eleanor's position in bed, ignoring her protests and causing her visible pain. Margaret meticulously noted the date, time, and details of each incident, compiling a detailed log to present alongside the videos. Meanwhile, Lisa recruited 2 other trusted colleagues, Mark, a seasoned nurse, and Sarah, a compassionate aide, to help monitor Eleanor and other residents during their shifts. Though Margaret hadn't told them about the camera, she asked them to pay special attention to Carla's interactions and report anything unusual. Their observations painted a troubling picture. Mark mentioned seeing Carla snap at Eleanor during breakfast, while Sarah recounted overhearing her complain bitterly about difficult residents. These accounts added credibility to Margaret's suspicions and strengthened their case. Despite the growing body of evidence, Margaret struggled with doubt. Late at night, as she reviewed the footage in her apartment, she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. Was she crossing a line by spying on a co-worker? Could she have handled the situation differently? The ethical gray area gnawed at her, making it hard to sleep. Yet, whenever she thought about Eleanor lying in bed, trembling in fear, her resolve hardened. This wasn't about rules or consequences. It was about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. One evening, as Margaret scrolled through the latest video clips, she noticed something chilling. In addition to her usual rough handling, Carla had begun taunting Eleanor with cruel remarks. "No one cares what happens to you anyway," she sneered in one clip. "Your family never visits. Your friends are all dead. Who's going to miss you?" Margaret felt sick to her stomach as she watched Eleanor's face crumple in response. The elderly woman didn't argue or fight back. She simply turned away, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was a heartbreaking reminder of how vulnerable Eleanor truly was and how much power Carla wielded over her. That night, Margaret called Lisa, her voice trembling with urgency. "We can't wait any longer," she said. "Every second we delay puts her at risk. We need to act now." Lisa agreed, her tone firm and reassuring. "Okay, let's get everything ready. Tomorrow we'll present the evidence to the director. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Hanging up the phone, Margaret stared at the screen, her mind racing. She knew the next step would be the hardest yet. The moment of truth, when she would expose Carla's actions and reveal her own role. In uncovering them, fear gripped her, but beneath it lay a fierce determination. No matter what happened, she vowed to stand by Eleanor and ensure justice was served. As dawn broke outside her window, casting soft light across the room, Margaret steeled herself for the battle ahead. She thought of Eleanor's tear-streaked face, her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty, and her unspoken plea for help. Margaret whispered a silent promise to the elderly woman, "I won't let you down." The next morning, Margaret woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. Her mind was clear, her resolve unwavering. Today was the day she would confront the truth head-on and bring Carla's actions to light. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were risks involved, both for her career and her reputation. But she couldn't stand by any longer. Eleanor deserved justice, and so did every other resident who might have suffered under Carla's care. Before heading to work, Margaret spent an hour organizing the evidence she had gathered. She printed out screenshots from the video footage, highlighting key moments that showed Carla's abusive behavior. Alongside these images, she included written notes detailing each incident, dates, times, descriptions of what happened, and how Eleanor reacted. The log was meticulous, leaving no room for doubt about the pattern of mistreatment. She also compiled accounts from Lisa, Mark, and Sarah, summarizing their observations of Carla's behavior during their shifts. By the time she finished, Margaret had a comprehensive file that painted a damning picture. As she drove to Hillside Retirement Home, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. She rehearsed what she would say to the facility's director, Mr. Thompson, a kind but firm man in his late 50s who took pride in maintaining high standards at the retirement home. Margaret respected him and trusted that he would take her claims seriously, but she still worried about how he might react to the revelation that she had secretly installed a camera. Would he see it as a breach of trust? Or would he understand that her intentions were noble? When she arrived at the facility, Margaret asked Lisa to join her in meeting with Mr. Thompson. Having another witness present would lend credibility to her story and provide emotional support if things got tense. Together, they knocked on the door to his office. After a brief pause, Mr. Thompson called them in, looking up from his desk with a warm smile. "Margaret, Lisa," he greeted them. "What brings you two here today?" Margaret hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding. Then, drawing strength from Lisa's encouraging nod, she began. "Mr. Thompson, I need to talk to you about something very serious. It's about one of our residents, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, and her treatment by a member of our staff." Mr. Thompson's expression shifted immediately, his smile fading into concern. "Go on," he said, leaning forward slightly. Taking a deep breath, Margaret explained everything. The bruises, her growing suspicions, and the hidden camera she had installed in Eleanor's room. As she spoke, she watched his face closely, searching for signs of judgment or disapproval. To her relief, he listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she mentioned the video footage, she pulled out her phone and played a clip for him, showing Carla's harsh words and rough handling of Eleanor. Mr. Thompson's reaction was immediate and visceral. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed as he watched the video. When it ended, he sat back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "This is deeply troubling," he said, his voice low and measured. "I had no idea this was happening." Margaret nodded, feeling a surge of relief that he wasn't dismissing her concerns. "I know installing the camera without permission was wrong," she admitted, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "But I did it because I suspected abuse, and I needed proof. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing while someone was being hurt." Mr. Thompson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your actions may not have followed protocol, but your intentions were honorable. What matters most is protecting our residents, and based on what you've shown me, it seems we have a serious issue on our hands." With that, Margaret handed over the file she had prepared, explaining each section in detail. Mr. Thompson flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly grave. "This is enough to warrant an investigation," he said finally. "I'll review the footage thoroughly and speak with Mrs. Grayson privately to hear her account. In the meantime, I'm suspending Carla pending further inquiry." Margaret felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. He believed her. He understood why she had taken such drastic measures, and he was acting decisively to address the problem. Still, she couldn't shake the lingering worry that Carla might retaliate or try to discredit her claims. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," she said sincerely. "I just want to make sure Eleanor and everyone else here is safe." "You've done the right thing, Margaret," he replied, his tone reassuring. "And I'll ensure this matter is handled with the utmost care. You have my word." After leaving Mr. Thompson's office, Margaret and Lisa exchanged a quiet but meaningful look. They had taken a huge step, but the battle wasn't over yet. Word spread quickly among the staff about Carla's suspension, though no one revealed the full details of the situation. Some colleagues expressed surprise, while others seemed uneasy, perhaps wondering if similar issues existed elsewhere in the facility. Margaret kept her head down, focusing on her duties and checking in on Eleanor whenever possible. Eleanor herself seemed to sense that something had changed. During one visit, Margaret found her sitting by the window, gazing out at the garden. Her eyes still carried traces of sadness, but there was a flicker of curiosity in them now. "Margaret," she said softly, "is everything all right?" "Something feels different." Margaret hesitated, unsure how much to share, but seeing the vulnerability in Eleanor's gaze, she decided honesty was best. "We're making sure you're safe, Eleanor," she said gently. "You don't need to worry anymore. Things are going to get better." Eleanor reached out, her frail hand trembling as it rested briefly on Margaret's arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to Margaret. She smiled warmly, squeezing Eleanor's hand before continuing with her rounds. Over the next few days, Margaret threw herself into her work, channeling her energy into ensuring the residents received the care and respect they deserved. With Carla gone, even temporarily, the atmosphere in the facility felt lighter, less tense. Residents seemed more relaxed, and the staff worked together with renewed focus. Yet, Margaret couldn't fully relax. She knew the investigation would take time, and until it concluded, she remained vigilant, keeping an eye on Eleanor and anyone else who might be vulnerable. One evening, as she reviewed the final pieces of footage to submit to Mr. Thompson, Lisa stopped by her apartment unannounced. "How are you holding up?" Lisa asked, settling onto the couch beside her. "I'm okay," Margaret replied, though her voice betrayed a hint of exhaustion. "It's been a lot, but I feel like we're doing the right thing. For Eleanor, for everyone." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "You've inspired me, you know. Seeing how far you were willing to go to protect someone, it makes me want to do more. Maybe we should push for bigger changes around here, like stricter hiring processes or mandatory training on elder care ethics." Margaret smiled faintly, the idea sparking a glimmer of hope within her. "That's not a bad idea," she said. "If this leads to real improvements, not just for Hillside but for other places too, then none of this will have been in vain." As they sat together talking late into the night about ways to advocate for better care standards, Margaret felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, she had taken a risk, and yes, the journey had been difficult, but she had stood up for what was right. And in doing so, she had sparked a chain reaction that could lead to meaningful change. And that, she realized, was worth every sleepless night and every moment of fear. For the first time in weeks, Margaret allowed herself to believe that brighter days lay ahead, for Eleanor, for Hillside, and for herself. The days following Carla's suspension felt like a turning point at Hillside Retirement Home. The facility buzzed with quiet conversations and cautious optimism, though no one dared to speak openly about the investigation. Margaret noticed subtle shifts in the atmosphere. Residents seemed less anxious, staff members worked with renewed dedication, and even the air itself felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. But for Margaret, the sense of relief was tempered by lingering questions. Would the investigation confirm her findings? What would happen to Carla? And most importantly, how could they ensure something like this never happened again? Mr. Thompson wasted no time in addressing the situation. He called an emergency meeting with the senior staff, including Margaret and Lisa, to discuss next steps. Sitting in his office, surrounded by folders and notes, he outlined a plan to conduct a thorough review of all caregiving practices at Hillside. "This incident has exposed a gap in our system," he admitted, his tone grave but resolute. "We need to identify where we failed and take immediate action to prevent it from happening again." Margaret listened intently, her heart swelling with pride for Mr. Thompson's leadership. He proposed implementing stricter background checks for new hires, mandatory training sessions on elder abuse awareness, and regular supervision of nighttime shifts. He also announced plans to install discrete security cameras in common areas, not hidden ones like Margaret's, but clearly marked devices designed to deter misconduct while respecting residents' privacy. It was a bold move, one that signaled a commitment to transparency and accountability. As the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Thompson turned to Margaret. "Your courage in bringing this to light cannot be overstated," he said earnestly. "While your methods weren't conventional, they were necessary. You've reminded us all why we're here, to care for those who can't care for themselves." Margaret nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. She knew she hadn't acted alone. Lisa, Mark, Sarah, and others had played vital roles in supporting her mission. Still, the acknowledgement meant a great deal. For so long, she had carried the burden of secrecy and doubt, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Now, she finally felt validated, not just by Mr. Thompson, but by the positive changes unfolding around her. In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Carla's behavior intensified. Mr. Thompson reviewed the video footage frame by frame, documenting every instance of mistreatment. He also met privately with Eleanor, gently encouraging her to share her experiences without pressuring her. To everyone's relief, Eleanor opened up, confirming much of what Margaret had captured on camera. Her testimony added emotional weight to the case, painting a vivid picture of the fear and pain she had endured under Carla's care. Meanwhile, rumors about Carla's fate spread among the staff. Some speculated she would be fired outright, while others wondered if she might claim ignorance or blame her actions on stress. Margaret tried not to dwell on the speculation, focusing instead on her daily responsibilities. Yet curiosity gnawed at her, especially when Mr. Thompson called her into his office one afternoon for an update. "Carla has been formally terminated," he informed her, his voice steady but firm. "She's also barred from working in any capacity within elderly care facilities moving forward. Additionally, I've reported her to the state licensing board for further disciplinary action." Margaret exhaled deeply, a wave of satisfaction washing over her. Justice had been served, or at least as much justice as the system allowed. Still, she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Carla was young, with years ahead of her. What had driven her to behave so cruelly? Had she simply lacked empathy, or was there something deeper at play? These questions lingered in Margaret's mind, unresolved but not forgotten. With Carla gone, attention turned to Eleanor's well-being. Mr. Thompson arranged for her to be moved to a different wing of the facility, where she would receive round-the-clock care from vetted and experienced staff members. Margaret visited her frequently during this transition, ensuring she felt safe and supported. One evening, as Eleanor sat in her new room surrounded by fresh flowers and cheerful decorations, she looked up at Margaret with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "You saved me, Margaret. You gave me my life back." Margaret knelt beside her, taking her frail hand in hers. "You didn't need saving, Eleanor. You needed someone to listen, to believe you. And now you'll always have people who will." Eleanor smiled faintly, squeezing Margaret's hand before leaning back against her pillows. Watching her regain some of her strength and spirit filled Margaret with a deep sense of fulfillment. This was why she had chosen nursing as her career. to make a difference, however small, in the lives of others. But Margaret's journey didn't end there. Inspired by the changes sweeping through Hillside, she began advocating for broader reforms beyond the retirement home's walls. With Lisa's encouragement, she organized workshops for caregivers on recognizing and preventing elder abuse. She reached out to local media outlets sharing her story while protecting Eleanor's identity to raise awareness about the issue. Her efforts caught the attention of community leaders who invited her to speak at town hall meetings and conferences. First, Margaret hesitated to step into the spotlight. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she worried about backlash from those who might disapprove of her use of the hidden camera. But the overwhelming support she received, from colleagues, residents' families, and even strangers, gave her the confidence to keep going. People praised her bravery, calling her a hero for standing up to wrongdoing and sparking meaningful change. One particularly memorable moment came during a local news interview. The anchor asked Margaret, "Looking back, do you regret installing the camera despite the risks?" Margaret paused, reflecting on the question. "I won't lie. It was a difficult decision," she admitted. "I knew I was breaking rules, and I feared the consequences. But when I saw those bruises on Eleanor, I realized I had a choice: stay silent and hope for the best, or take a stand and risk everything. In the end, I chose to act because I believed it was the right thing to do. And seeing the impact it's had not just for Eleanor but for the entire community, it makes me believe I made the right call." Her words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking discussions about elder care standards and accountability in caregiving professions. Letters poured in from across the country, thanking Margaret for shining a light on a problem many had ignored. Some shared their own stories of neglect or abuse, seeking advice on how to seek help. Others offered words of encouragement, praising her for inspiring them to speak up about injustices they'd witnessed. Through it all, Margaret remained grounded, focusing on the work still to be done. She partnered with advocacy groups to push for legislative changes, such as requiring mandatory reporting of suspected elder abuse and increasing funding for caregiver training programs. She collaborated with other nurses and caregivers to create resources for identifying signs of mistreatment and empowering victims to come forward. Slowly but surely, her efforts began making waves, influencing policies and practices far beyond Hillside Retirement Home. Despite her growing public profile, Margaret never lost sight of why she started this journey. Eleanor. Every time she visited the elderly woman, she was reminded of the human cost of neglect and cruelty, and the transformative power of compassion and courage. Eleanor continued to thrive in her new environment, her laughter returning and her eyes regaining their familiar sparkle. On sunny afternoons, they often sat together in the garden, sharing stories and enjoying the simple pleasures of life. "You've changed so many lives, Margaret," Eleanor remarked one day, sipping tea as they watched birds flit between trees. "Not just mine, but everyone's." Margaret smiled, shaking her head modestly. "I didn't do it alone, Eleanor. You inspired me to keep fighting even when things felt impossible. And now, you're inspiring others too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the landscape, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but she faced them with unwavering determination. She had learned that standing up for what was right, even in the face of fear and uncertainty, could create ripples of change that extended far beyond what she ever imagined. And in that moment, surrounded by beauty and possibility, Margaret knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, Margaret's life transformed in ways she could never have anticipated. What began as a quiet act of defiance, installing a hidden camera to protect one vulnerable woman, had blossomed into a movement that touched countless lives. Her advocacy work took her beyond the walls of Hillside Retirement Home, connecting her with caregivers, families, and policymakers who shared her passion for improving elder care. Yet, through it all, Margaret remained grounded, drawing strength from the relationships she had built and the changes she had witnessed. One crisp autumn morning, Margaret stood at the podium of a community center packed with people eager to hear her speak. The event was part of a statewide campaign called Voices for Elders, aimed at raising awareness about elder abuse and promoting systemic reforms. As she looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, caregivers and advocates, she felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who believed in her mission, who saw the value in standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. "Thank you all for being here today," Margaret began, her voice steady but warm. "I want to start by telling you a story about an elderly woman named Eleanor Grayson." She recounted the events that had led her to install the camera, describing the bruises, the late-night footage, and the courage it took to bring Carla's actions to light. Her words painted a vivid picture of vulnerability and resilience, leaving many in the audience visibly moved. "But this isn't just Eleanor's story," Margaret continued. "It's the story of thousands of seniors across our country who suffer in silence because they don't know where to turn or who to trust. It's the story of caregivers who are overworked and undertrained, struggling to provide quality care in systems that often fail them. And it's the story of anyone who has ever felt powerless to make a difference." Applause erupted when she finished speaking, but Margaret didn't bask in the praise. Instead, she invited others to share their stories, creating a safe space for voices that had long been ignored. One woman tearfully described how her father had been neglected in a nursing home until she discovered bed sores hidden beneath his clothing. A young caregiver admitted feeling overwhelmed and unsupported, leading to moments of frustration he deeply regretted. Each story added depth to the conversation, reinforcing the need for systemic change. Back at Hillside, Margaret continued championing improvements within the facility. Under Mr. Thompson's leadership, the retirement home became a model for compassionate elder care. New hires underwent rigorous background checks and empathy training, while existing staff participated in workshops designed to foster kindness and patience. Regular check-ins between residents and supervisors ensured concerns were addressed promptly, and anonymous tip lines allowed employees to report suspicious behavior without fear of retaliation. Margaret also spearheaded a mentorship program, pairing experienced caregivers with newer ones. Lisa volunteered immediately, mentoring Sarah, the aide who had helped document Carla's behavior. Together, they developed strategies for managing stress and building rapport with residents. Watching the two women bond over shared experiences reminded Margaret of the importance of teamwork and support in caregiving. Eleanor, meanwhile, thrived in her new environment. With round-the-clock care and a team of dedicated staff members, she regained much of her independence and confidence. She joined group activities, attended art classes, and even started a small book club with other residents. Margaret visited her regularly, marveling at how far she'd come since those dark nights filled with fear and pain. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Eleanor handed Margaret a small, neatly wrapped package. "For you," she said with a twinkle in her eye. "A token of my gratitude." Margaret unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the words, "Courage changes lives." Tears welled up in her eyes as she slipped it onto her wrist. "Eleanor, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Eleanor replied softly. "Just wear it as a reminder that your bravery made a difference, not just for me, but for so many others." The gesture left Margaret speechless, a lump forming in her throat. For all the accolades and recognition she had received, nothing compared to the heartfelt appreciation of someone whose life she had directly impacted. That bracelet became a cherished keepsake, a symbol of why she had chosen this path in the first place. Despite her successes, Margaret knew the fight wasn't over. Elder abuse remained a pervasive issue, affecting millions worldwide. But she refused to let the enormity of the problem overwhelm her. Instead, she focused on what she could control: educating others, advocating for policy changes, and inspiring caregivers to treat their residents with dignity and respect. Her efforts began bearing fruit in unexpected ways. Local lawmakers introduced legislation requiring mandatory elder abuse training for all healthcare workers, citing Margaret's advocacy as a catalyst for change. Schools incorporated lessons on elder care ethics into their curriculums, teaching students the importance of compassion and accountability. Even social media campaigns highlighting elder rights gained traction, spreading awareness to younger generations. Through it all, Margaret maintained her humility, deflecting praise onto the people who supported her journey. "I'm not a hero," she often said during interviews. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and decided to do something about it. Any one of you could do the same." And perhaps that was the most powerful message of all. By sharing her story openly and honestly, Margaret showed others that ordinary individuals could spark extraordinary change. Whether it was installing a camera, filing a report, or simply listening to a resident's concerns, every action mattered. Every voice counted. On a chilly December evening, Margaret attended a holiday celebration at Hillside. The facility buzzed, with laughter and music, residents and staff coming together to celebrate another year of growth and healing. As she mingled with colleagues and residents, Margaret noticed Eleanor sitting by the fireplace, surrounded by friends. Her face glowed with happiness, a stark contrast to the fearful woman Margaret had once known. Approaching her, Margaret knelt beside her chair. "You look radiant tonight, Eleanor." Eleanor chuckled, patting Margaret's hand. "Oh, stop it. You're the one making everyone smile these days. Look at what you've done for us, for all of us." Margaret shook her head, smiling softly. "No, Eleanor. We did this together. Everyone who spoke up, who cared enough to listen, who worked to make things better, we're all part of this." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, then leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Promise me something, Margaret. Promise you'll keep fighting. Keep shining your light even when it feels hard." Margaret squeezed her hand, her heart swelling with emotion. "I promise, Eleanor. As long as there's breath in my body, I'll keep fighting." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of joy and connection. As Margaret drove home later that night, she reflected on how far she'd come. From a single act of courage to a nationwide movement, her journey had been anything but predictable. Yet through every challenge and triumph, she had stayed true to her core belief that no one should suffer alone. Pulling into her driveway, Margaret glanced down at the bracelet gleaming on her wrist. Courage changes lives. Those three simple words encapsulated everything she had fought for and everything she hoped to achieve. They reminded her that even in the darkest moments, a single act of bravery could ignite a chain reaction of hope and transformation. As she stepped inside her house, ready to rest before another day of advocacy awaited her, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. She had found her purpose, not just as a nurse, but as a voice for the voiceless, a protector of the vulnerable, and a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. And she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she would continue walking this path for as long as it called to her.